Elara never imagined her quiet, ordered world would be fractured by the sound of her own dog's voice. The silence in her house was a carefully curated thing. A tapestry woven from the familiar hum of the refrigerator, the gentle tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, and the soft padding of her guide dog, Leo, on the worn hardwood floors. Leo, a golden retriever with a soul as steady as a calm sea, was more than her eyes, he was her anchor. He was a creature of silent competence, his language a nudge of his wet nose, the subtle tension in his harness, the contented sigh he'd release when curled at her feet. For him to bark was an anomaly, an alarm. For him to bark at nothing, at a piece of furniture, was utterly baffling. It started on a Tuesday, an afternoon thick with the scent of brewing tea and approaching rain. They were walking down the hallway, a path they'd traced thousands of times, when Leo suddenly stopped dead. His body went rigid. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound so foreign Elara's hand tightened on his harness. Then came the bark. Not a playful yap, but a sharp, concussive report that echoed in the narrow space. Elara's heart leaped into her throat. "Leo, what is it?" "Quiet, boy," he barked again, his head aimed directly at the long, ornate mirror that hung on the wall. She assumed, of course, that it was his reflection. It was a common enough story, a dog startled by its own image. But Leo wasn't a puppy. He was a 5-year-old, impeccably trained guide dog. He knew this house, this hallway, this mirror. He'd passed it 100 times a day for years without a glance. She reached down, her fingers finding the tense muscles in his neck. "It's just you, silly boy. That's you in the glass," but his bark wasn't aggressive or territorial. It held a different note, a strange timbre of urgency, almost of pleading. This was the first clue that her understanding of the world, a world she navigated so carefully through touch and sound, was profoundly wrong. When Leo's insistent cries continued for 3 straight days, a constant, frantic vigil aimed at the unseen glass, Elara realized this was no ordinary canine quirk. What he was trying to show her, hidden in a place she could never look, would unravel the very fabric of her reality. This was not the story of a confused dog, it was the beginning of a rescue. If you believe in the unspoken bond that connects a soul to its guardian, a bond that transcends sight and sound, then stay with me on this journey into the dark. Elara's life was a map of textures and sounds. She knew the specific groan of the 3rd step on the staircase, the smooth, cool feel of the porcelain doorknobs, the patch of frayed wool on the arm of her favorite chair. Her home was a sanctuary not of sight, but of certainty. Every object had its place, its purpose, its tactile signature. The mirror in the hallway was simply a cold, smooth plane on the wall, a non-entity. Inherited with the old house from her grandfather, it was an object for others, a relic of a visual world she did not inhabit. To her, it was just a landmark, the point where the hallway carpet met the wooden floor of the living room. Leo was the living, breathing center of that map. Their bond was a silent symphony of trust. He was the warmth at her side, the steady pressure of the harness that guided her through a world of unseen obstacles. His quiet presence was the constant reassurance that she was not alone. So when his barking began, it was a discordant note that shattered the entire composition. On the 2nd day, she tried to reason it away. "Maybe there's a mouse in the wall, Leo," she murmured, kneeling beside him, her hands stroking his agitated fur. She pressed her ear against the cool plaster beside the mirror frame, listening. She heard only the faint, rhythmic thumping of her own pulse. No scratching, no scurrying. Yet Leo remained unconvinced. He would whine, a high, thin sound of frustration, before letting out another series of barks, each one a question she could not answer. His entire focus was locked on that single spot. He would ignore treats, ignore his favorite toys, ignore her soothing commands. The behavior was so uncharacteristic it felt like a betrayal of his very nature. By the 3rd day, Elara's patience was fraying into a thread of deep-seated worry. Was he ill? Was some neurological issue causing this fixation? She ran her hands over his body, checking for any sign of pain or distress, but found nothing. He was healthy, strong, yet his mind seemed to be trapped in a loop, fixated on the silent, reflective glass. The change in the atmosphere was subtle at first, easily dismissed. Elara began to notice a persistent coolness that seemed to emanate from that section of the hallway. It was a distinct pocket of cold air, the kind you'd feel standing by a poorly sealed window in winter. But there were no windows in the hall. She traced the wall with her fingertips, from the floor to as high as she could reach, searching for a crack, a draft, anything. The wall was seamless, solid. The cold was just there. It clung to the mirror. When she placed her palm against the glass, it was colder than the surrounding wall, a deep, penetrating chill that seemed to seep into her bones. She told herself it was the material, that glass simply held the cold differently than plaster. But a seed of unease had been planted. The acoustics of the hallway seemed different, too. Her footsteps, usually a soft, muffled thud on the runner, now seemed to have a faint, almost imperceptible echo, as she passed the mirror. It was as if the sound were bouncing off something farther away, as if the space had subtly expanded. She would stop, clap her hands, and listen intently. There it was, a tiny, sharp reverberation that shouldn't exist. She was a musician by trade, a cellist, her ears trained to perceive the most minute nuances of sound. She trusted her hearing more than anything. And her hearing was telling her that something about the physical space around the mirror was fundamentally wrong. Her rational mind fought against these sensory whispers. It was stress. Leo's bizarre behavior was making her anxious, and her anxiety was making her imagine things. She was projecting her own unease onto her environment. That had to be the explanation. Desperate for a solution, she took a heavy quilt from the linen closet and draped it over the mirror. If it was his reflection causing the issue, this would solve it. She smoothed the fabric down, covering the ornate frame completely. "There," she said, her voice more hopeful than certain. "It's gone now, boy. See? All gone." Leo fell silent. For a moment, a wave of relief washed over Elara. It had worked. It was that simple. But the silence lasted only a few seconds. Then, a low, mournful whine began, more heartbreaking than the barking had been. He nudged the heavy quilt with his nose, pawing at the bottom edge, his distress now amplified. He wasn't barking at an image. He was barking at what was behind the image. The call to the vet was fruitless. Dr. Evans was kind, patient, but offered only predictable theories. It could be a new anxiety, Elara. Sometimes it manifests in strange, repetitive behaviors. We could try a mild sedative. Elara recoiled from the suggestion. Drugging Leo felt like a violation, like silencing a voice simply because she couldn't understand its language. This wasn't anxiety. She knew his anxieties, the low rumble during thunderstorms, the slight tremble during fireworks. This was different. This was a mission. His focus was absolute, his intention unwavering. He was trying to tell her something vital, and she was failing to listen. The days bled into a week. The barking became the new, jarring rhythm of their lives. It started the moment they came downstairs in the morning and ended only when she could coax him into the bedroom at night, closing the door on the haunted hallway. Sleep offered little respite. Elara was plagued by dreams of long, dark corridors and the sound of distant, echoing cries. She felt a growing sense of isolation, a feeling that she and her dog were trapped together in a puzzle no one else could see or hear. Her friends, when she tried to explain, offered well-meaning but useless advice. "He's probably just bored," one suggested. "Get him a new puzzle toy," another said. "Maybe you should just get rid of the mirror," but getting rid of it felt like admitting defeat, like ignoring the message because the messenger was inconvenient. More than that, a strange, protective instinct was rising in her. Leo was her partner. If something was distressing him this profoundly, she had a duty to understand it, not dismiss it. Her world had shrunk to the size of that hallway, to the space between her dog's desperate pleas and the cold, silent wall. The sensory clues she had once dismissed now felt like shouts. The cold was no longer just a draft, it was a presence. The faint echo was no longer a trick of the mind, it was a confirmation of hidden depth. She began to spend hours just sitting on the floor near the mirror, Leo's head in her lap, listening. She would quiet her own breathing, attune her senses to the house, and try to perceive what he perceived. She heard the house settle, the creak of wood, the rush of water through pipes. But beneath it all, she began to feel something else. A vibration. It was incredibly faint, a low-frequency hum that seemed to travel through the floorboards. It wasn't constant, but intermittent, like a faraway engine turning on and off. She'd press her palm flat against the floor, then the wall, then the mirror itself, trying to locate the source. It was strongest at the mirror. It was a tangible, physical sensation that defied all logic. The mirror was vibrating. The storm that broke on the 9th night was biblical. Rain lashed against the windows in horizontal sheets, and the wind howled like a grieving animal. The old house groaned under the assault. Thunder cracked overhead, so close and violent that the floorboards shuddered. With each clap, Leo's barking grew more frenzied, his panic escalating with the storm's fury. Then, with a final, blinding flash of lightning that Alara perceived as a sudden pressure change in the air, and a crackle of static, the power died. The hum of the refrigerator ceased. The ticking of the clock stopped. The house was plunged into a profound and unnerving silence, broken only by the storm and Leo's frantic, desperate cries. In the sudden, oppressive darkness, his barking was no longer just a noise, it was a beacon of terror. He wasn't just barking now. He was digging. His claws scrabbled wildly at the wooden floor in front of the mirror, the sound sharp and splintering. This was it. The breaking point. Every rational explanation had crumbled, washed away by the storm and her dog's undeniable terror. This was not anxiety. This was not a reflection. This was real. Whatever was happening in this hallway, Leo believed their lives depended on it. And in that moment, Alara chose to believe him. Her own fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but her fear for Leo was greater. She crawled toward the sound of his frantic claws, her hands sweeping across the floor. "Leo," she whispered, her voice tight with adrenaline. "Okay, boy. I'm here. I'm listening. Show me. Show me what's wrong." Her hand found his trembling flank. He paused his digging, pressing his wet nose urgently against her hand, then against the very bottom of the mirror's heavy, wooden frame. He whined, a sharp, insistent sound. He was directing her. Taking a shaky breath, Alara followed his lead. She ran her hands over the familiar contours of the frame, the carved leaves and vines she knew by touch. Then she flattened her palms against the surface of the glass, just as he nudged her to do. The cold was shocking, an icy burn that felt alien and wrong. It felt less like glass and more like a sheet of frozen steel. She pressed harder, putting her weight into it, expecting the unyielding resistance of solid wall. Instead, the glass moved. It didn't crack or shatter. It gave way, pushing inward with a low, guttural groan of rusted metal. The sound of protesting hinges, hinges that had been silent for a lifetime, screamed in the quiet hallway. A wave of vertigo washed over Alara. Her entire mental map of her home, the solid, reliable geography she had built in her mind, tilted on its axis. This wasn't a mirror. It had never been a mirror. It was a door. A blast of air rushed out to meet her, an ancient, captured breath escaping its tomb. It was an odor of profound stillness, thick with the smell of damp earth, crumbling stone, and something else, something cloying and metallic that made her stomach churn. It was the smell of decay, of time left to rot. The acoustics of the hallway instantly transformed. The space was no longer contained. It was open. The sounds of the storm now seemed to come from two directions, outside her windows, and from deep within the wall in front of her. From that new, impossible darkness, another sound emerged, carried on the stale air. It was a faint, rhythmic dripping of water. And beneath that, something that made the hair on her arms stand on end. A whimper. A tiny, unimaginably weak sound of suffering. It wasn't an echo of Leo. It was another voice, from another place. The sound hit Leo like a physical blow. With a gut-wrenching cry, he surged forward, pushing past Alara's hands and disappearing into the black opening. Leo. No, wait. Her command was lost in the sudden void. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her shock. Her dog, her guide, her anchor, was gone, swallowed by a darkness she couldn't even begin to comprehend. For a paralyzing second, she was frozen. The world she knew was behind her, the safe, predictable map of her home. Ahead was a terrifying unknown, a place of cold, decay, and whimpers. But Leo was in there. Her choice was not a choice at all. Loyalty was a cord that pulled her forward. With her heart hammering against her ribs, she got on her hands and knees and crawled through the opening, leaving the world she knew behind for a darkness that was absolute. The air inside was thick and suffocating, so cold it felt like crawling into a refrigerator. The floor was no longer smooth wood but rough, uneven stone that scraped against her palms and knees. The passage was narrow, the walls closing in on her. She reached out, her fingers brushing against damp, crumbling brick coated in a slick, mossy film. It was a tunnel, sloping steadily downward. The only guide she had was the sound of Leo's panting somewhere ahead in the blackness. Leo, she called, her voice a dry whisper. I'm coming, boy. His panting stopped, replaced by a soft, encouraging whine, urging her onward. The whimpering was louder now, closer. It was a pathetic, broken sound, each tiny cry a needle in Alara's heart. She followed the sounds, her movements slow and agonizingly careful. The passage finally opened up, the confining walls falling away. She had crawled into a small, cellar-like room. The air was even colder here, the smell of damp earth overwhelming. The dripping sound was right beside her, water plopping into a puddle somewhere on the floor. Leo was directly in front of her. She could hear the soft, wet sound of his tongue, the gentle lapping of a comforting lick. He was tending to the source of the whimpering. What is it, boy? She breathed, reaching forward into the darkness. Her trembling fingers found Leo's head, then moved past him. She touched cold, rusted metal. A chain. It was heavy, anchored to the wall. She followed it down, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. And then she felt it. Fur. Not Leo's thick, clean coat, but a patch of thin, matted fur stretched taut over bone. It was filthy, cold, and trembling with a violence that seemed too powerful for such a small frame. It was another dog. A small creature, chained to the wall, left to die in this forgotten place. A wave of nausea and rage washed over her. Who could do this? How long had it been here? The house had been in her family for over 60 years. Her grandfather had bought it from an old, reclusive man who had passed away. This cruelty was a secret that had been sealed behind a wall for decades. The dog let out another weak cry as her fingers gently explored. It was skeletal. She could feel every rib, every vertebra of its spine. It was a miracle it was still alive. She felt for a collar, for the lock that held the chain. It was a huge, old-fashioned padlock, its surface pitted with rust. It was cold and immovable. No key. Of course, there was no key. Panic threatened to consume her. She was in a dark, underground cell with a dying animal and no way to free it. She could feel the fragile life beneath her fingertips fading with every shallow breath. Leaving it here, even for a moment, felt like a death sentence. But she had no choice. "Stay, Leo," she commanded, her voice shaking but firm. "Stay with him." "Guard," she heard a low whine of protest, but he obeyed. He understood. He was the guardian now. She turned and began the arduous journey back. Crawling up the sloping passage felt 10 times longer than coming down. The feel of the damp stone, the smell of the stale air, it was all imprinted in her mind, a sensory nightmare. She emerged back into her own hallway, the sounds of the storm now a distant, muffled backdrop. The air in her home felt warm, clean, and full of life. She scrambled to her feet, her hands fumbling along the wall until she reached the kitchen. Her toolbox was under the sink, exactly where it always was. Her fingers, frantic but sure, danced over the cold metal of the tools, identifying them by weight and shape. A heavy hammer. A cold chisel. She grabbed them and, without a second's hesitation, plunged back into the darkness. The return journey was fueled by pure adrenaline. When she reached the small chamber, Leo was right where she'd left him, a warm, solid presence beside the shivering creature on the floor. "It's okay," she murmured, both to the trapped dog and to herself. "I'm here now. We are going to get you out." She positioned the tip of the chisel against the shackle of the padlock. The work was brutal and clumsy in the pitch black. She could only operate by feel, her knuckles scraping against the stone wall. The first blow of the hammer against the chisel was deafening, a percussive explosion in the confined space. The small dog yelped in terror. "Shush, it's okay, little one. It's okay." "Hold on," Elara whispered, her voice a soothing mantra against the violent sounds. "Just hold on." She worked relentlessly, sweat beading on her forehead, her arms aching. The smell of ozone and hot metal filled the air, as sparks she couldn't see flew from the impacts. Each clang of the hammer was a prayer, a strike against the cruelty that had imprisoned this life. She lost all track of time, lost in the rhythm of the work, position, strike, reposition, strike. Finally, after an eternity, there was a different sound. A sharp, resonant crack. The padlock, weakened by decades of rust and the force of her blows, shattered. The chain slithered to the floor with a metallic hiss. It was free. The small dog, as if the last of its strength had been tied to the breaking of the lock, collapsed completely. It didn't even have the energy to stand. Gently, Elara gathered the impossibly light body into her arms. It was nothing but bones and matted fur, but a faint, thready heartbeat pulsed against her hand. A life. A life Leo had saved. With the small dog cradled against her chest and Leo guiding her from behind, she made her way out of the darkness, and back into the world. She carried the fragile creature into the warmth of her kitchen, and laid it gently on a soft blanket. In the faint emergency light from her phone, she could finally get a sense of what she held. It was a small terrier mix, its fur caked with years of filth. Its eyes were clouded over, likely blind from malnutrition and age. It was old, tired, and had been suffering for a long, long time. The emergency vet, Dr. Anya Sharma, arrived within the hour. Elara's frantic, breathless story of a secret door, a hidden passage, and a dog chained in the dark must have sounded like a delusion, but the shivering, emaciated animal in her kitchen was undeniable proof. Dr. Sharma worked with a quiet, focused intensity, her voice calm and reassuring. "He's severely dehydrated and malnourished," she said, her hands expertly finding a vein for an 4-line. "His muscles have atrophied. I don't know how he survived." "It's a miracle." As the vet worked, Elara sat on the floor, her hand resting on Leo's head. He was quiet now, his mission complete. He watched the proceedings with a calm, steady gaze, his body relaxed for the first time in over a week. He had done it. He had gotten his message through. Elara finally understood the full scope of his behavior. He hadn't been seeing a reflection in the mirror. He had been sensing the faint, desperate heartbeat through the wall. He had heard the weak whimpers that were too high-pitched or too soft for a human ear. His days of barking, his frantic digging, his unwavering focus, it wasn't madness. It was a desperate, sustained act of interspecies empathy. He had been shouting on behalf of a creature who had no voice, refusing to give up until someone listened. He was a hero. The small dog, whom she named Echo, spent a week at the veterinary hospital, hovering between life and death. But he was a fighter. Slowly, miraculously, he began to rally. He gained weight. The light returned to his clouded eyes, even if sight did not. When Alara finally brought him home, he was still weak, but he was alive. He was a quiet, gentle soul, a silent shadow who attached himself immediately to Leo. He followed him everywhere, sleeping curled against his larger body, drawing strength and comfort from the dog who had saved him. Months passed. The house settled into a new, more peaceful rhythm. The hidden door was left slightly ajar, the dark passage cleaned and aired out, a testament to the secret the house had kept. It was no longer a place of horror, but a symbol of resilience. Echo, once a skeleton, became a soft, happy dog who trotted through the house with a surprising spring in his step. What began as a terrifying mystery had transformed Alara's world. Her bond with Leo, already profound, had deepened into something sacred. She had learned to trust his instincts as much as her own senses, to listen not just with her ears, but with her heart. She learned that courage wasn't about the absence of fear, but about moving forward despite it, guided by loyalty and love. Her quiet, ordered world was no longer silent. It was filled with the soft clicking of Echo's nails on the floor, the gentle sighs of two sleeping dogs, and the constant, comforting presence of a family forged in darkness. She often sat in the hallway, one hand on Leo's powerful back, the other stroking Echo's velvety ears, listening to the synchronized, peaceful breathing of her two guides. Leo had not just been her eyes, he had been her conscience, reminding her that the most important truths are often hidden from sight, waiting for someone willing to break down a wall to find them. We build our lives around the senses we trust, barricading ourselves within the limits of our own perception. But the greatest miracles, the most profound connections, often lie in the spaces we cannot see or measure. Leo couldn't explain what he knew with words, but his heart spoke a language of unwavering loyalty that Alara finally learned to understand. How many silent pleas for help do we walk past every day, simply because we are not listening closely enough? If this story reminded you to trust the instincts of those you love, and to listen to the voices that have no words, please share it. Subscribe for more journeys into the heart of what it means to be connected, reminding us all that the world is so much more than what we can see.